We have about 37 minutes together today, so just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at and talking about is shared on the screen here. Something that I'd like to make clear, though, before we start is what this presentation is not about. So we're not going to be getting into the technical details about prefabrication at any level. We're really mostly interested in having a conversation around the relationships between prefabrication and project delivery models and technology. And that's really our focus today. We found that there's sometimes not as sophisticated an understanding about this. While it's relatively basic level material, it's fundamental to consider for project success. So I'm going to start by running through points on the prefab spectrum and timing and roles. Jen is going to talk about delivery model overview. We're going to do a quick little exercise. We'll talk about how you get started, and then we'll wrap things up. So we started our prefab journey at Chandos just a few years ago. And one of the things that we learned swiftly was that people, when they heard the word prefab, they got a little bit of a deer in the headlights kind of thing. And so we put together a prefabrication guide, because the bottom line, this is not rocket science, right? It's really pretty simple. We're putting stuff together somewhere else and then assembling larger chunks on site. And all of the associated benefits that many of us know accrue to that, safety, productivity, quality, all of those kinds of things accrue. But our team didn't really understand how all that stuff worked. So we put together a very simple prefabrication guide. It's only 12 pages long. It has an intro. It talks about why prefab and why we'd want to do it. What is prefabrication? The real meat of it is in this, the middle part about points on the prefab spectrum, and we'll talk more about that. We talk a little bit about on-site, off-site, and manufacturing, prefab roles and timing, and then getting started. And then we give our teams a couple of tools to use. So the most important sort of the meat of the guide is this idea that prefabrication exists on a spectrum, from single tray components to multi-tray components to volumetric modular to platforms or platforming. And so we wanted to communicate this idea that there is a spectrum of prefab that you can consider on any project. And then we dive into each one of those points on the spectrum and we have a conversation about it. What is that point on the spectrum? So what are single trade components? And we have some definitions. There are things that a single trade might elect to construct in their shop and then deliver. They don't really need input from anybody else on the team. They can choose to do it themselves, other than they might need to coordinate with somebody to make sure there's not something in their way. We give examples of what that point on the spectrum might be. So it might be like HVAC duct runs, or boiler panels, or washroom piping, or sprinkler tree panels, or things of that nature. We identify why there might be benefits for trades, the kinds of things that you might need to consider if you're thinking about single trade components. So a list of considerations, like it will require coordination for placement of the components. You'll want to leverage BIM and VDC. And then I think the most important part of each point on the spectrum is a section about what Chandos can do. And we talk about that our role as a general contractor, we can encourage trades to pursue prefab. We can assist with in-house BIM and VDC. We can help coordinate locations, so on and so forth. And then we went on and defined that for every point on the spectrum. So for multi-trade components, they're similar to single trade components, except they require the work of several trades to complete the component before it is moved to the site for assembly. So these are things like communication and utility trays, head wall assemblies, parapet sections, interior partitions with electrical cabling and piping and things of that nature. Again, a list of benefits for trades, a series of considerations. As you move up the spectrum, the list of considerations changes. So, this is now going to require coordination between the involved trades for the construction of the components offsite. It'll require coordination for the placement of the components on site. There will be greater materials logistics involved. Inspections might be impacted by the decision to move assembly of certain pieces off-site. There might be warehousing or other logistics challenges. And then again, a list of things that Chandos can do to advance thoughts about multi-tray components on our projects. Volumetric modular really, from our perspective, implies the enclosure of space. So a ductwork run or a head wall in a long-term care facility don't qualify as volumetric, but washroom pods or a full hotel room or a dormitory room would, because they really enclose space. So examples of modular components that we give to our teams: electrical rooms, mechanical rooms, elevator shafts or pump rooms, stairwells, washroom pods, and the like. Considerations again change. So now we need to really think critically before and after and during design. So we have to start moving the considerations upstream. It's going to be more coordination between the trades, more materials logistics, a lot of consideration about transportation and placement of completed modules in terms of weight and size. Inspections will almost certainly be impacted at this point, and so on and so forth. And again, a list of things that Chandos can do to advance pursuit of modular components. And then the idea of platforms or platforming, or a kit of parts. You can think about the chassis of a car as a platform on which you can build many different models of cars, or another way to think of it is a kit of parts, sort of an IKEA thing where you have a limited number of parts to choose from, but they can be assembled in a whole slew of different ways. And so again, we give some examples of platforms. We give some considerations, which means in this particular instance, if you're pursuing this kind of level of sophistication of prefab, that you're going to have to make this decision before design begins in order to accommodate that. Then the guide goes on to talk about prefab roles and timing, where we identify the different roles down the left and identify who at minimum needs to be involved for beneficial results. And then the points on the spectrum along the top, so single trade, multi-trade, modular, platforms, and platforming. And we identify who needs to be involved in those conversations and when they need to start for the greatest benefit. So it's pretty easy to see that as you move up the spectrum of prefab, the earlier you need to have those conversations occur, and with a larger number of stakeholders. So it's really just making those trends clear to our team so that as they do their work, they can get things done effectively. I'll turn it over to Jen, and she'll talk a little bit about delivery models.
Great, thanks, Markku. As you may have guessed from my title, the VP of Collaborative Construction, I have a little bias in this area around what some of my preferences are. But while before I run through this, if I would love to hear from people on the call, what delivery methods are you seeing, either your experience right now with projects you might be running, or what are you seeing as a company in terms of your most common delivery methods? So we're going to run through today the CCDC2, Design Bid Build, quickly construction management, the 5B, Design Build, which is a CCDC 14, and then IPD, or integrated project delivery, which is the CCDC 30. So we'll get started with Design Bid Build and run through just some of the core characteristics that make up each of these models. And that will give us some sense when we think about prefab, the impact that, how the delivery model might impact your ability to perform prefab. So Markku, I'll just have you switch slides there. Thanks. So a couple of really key features of Design Bid Build are that it is, competitive, low cost. It's very compartmentalized as a contract. So the owner has a contract with the consultant, and they have a contract with the general contractor. They are not connected. The design is done, completed prior to bidding. In this case, this model is marked often by being more susceptible to change orders. And it's one of the models, if you hear people talk about Design Bid Build and who won the job, you probably frequently heard the joke, it's who made the biggest mistake won the job, is sort of often associated with this. But there's no, the design has to be done and then construction starts. So there's no way to kind of phase tender any of this work with your contractor. And really the model is driven a little bit more to drive contractors to seek problems instead of solutions. So we'll move on next and look at construction management. So that was the CCDC2, which is the Design Bid Build. Construction management, this is where you have your general contractor come on board in the design phase, It brings a little more of that constructability and real cost time data into the process. From experience, we've had projects where we've jumped in on a CM job and it's been almost no design done at all. And we've had jobs where we've been brought in as a construction manager when, maybe 80% of the work was already done, and we were able to sort of look over the work at that point and provide some thoughts. So this, anyone who's worked in this model will know that you can kind of see it. You see it across the board. Trades in this model are still lump sum. So, you're still hard bidding most of that work, all of that work. And, owners do typically award based on lowest fee, just like they typically award design bid build on lowest price. But with construction management, you may see a bit more of a qualitative piece to this, where an owner has a few other things elements they may want to add in. What's interesting, and you'll notice about the contractual model, so the owner still has separate contracts with the consultant team and the contractor team. But you'll notice just on the graphic, there's a dotted line there. So the idea is that the consultant or the architect, prime consultant, they have a more collaborative working relationship together, where they're trying to do what's best for the project. So this has a slight different feel for sure, and it is more collaborative in nature. What's also interesting is construction management does allow for phase tendering, so you can start some of the project before all the design is done. A little more flexibility here. We'll take a look at DesignBidBuild next. DesignBidBuild has a couple of, there's basic DesignBidBuild. I won't get into detail too much on progressive DesignBidBuild, but it is another kind of modification of this. So with DesignBidBuild, a couple of the key characteristics is the owner ends up having one contract usually with the contractor and the contractor, and they have a team assembled. So the owner hires this DesignBidBuild team. You can get sort of greater cost certainty at the beginning of a project, but it really does, from an owner standpoint, you'll see there, a robust statement of requirements. This is so that the team is then able to complete the design and construction work. But once you lock into that number, then it's the team's ability to sort of hit the owners what they're wanting at that point. So there is a more earlier collaboration, and you get a bit more collaboration with the trades, because frequently there are trades that are brought in, some of the core ones, as part of your design bid build or your design build team. But in this, what's interesting is that the contractor, because there is one contract, the contractor is the one who has that relationship with the owner. So there is a step between the design team and the owner, which depends on the project, might be of benefit or not. I guess the other key thing here is any of the savings accrue to that design builder. Now they can set something up within their team internal if they want to change that in some way, so that they are incentivizing some of their team to perform better, more effectively. The other thing is the contractor in this model, once you have your statement of requirements from the owner and you start working on the more detailed design, if you've locked into a price at that point in a traditional design build, that's where, to be honest, the contractor is more incentivized to do the work. They obviously want to make as much money as they can, that most businesses do. So they're incentivized to really save as much money as possible. Where progressive design build differs is that you would hold open that locking into the number longer and have more collaboration through more of that design process and giving the owner more input, because once you lock into that number, there's still a level of input, but it really can be very specific around just going back to the specs and saying, okay, these are the options, and maybe not as much flexibility around that. And then last, we'll look at IPD. So integrated project delivery. This is the CCDC 30. It is highly collaborative by nature. As you can see by the contract model and the graphic, it is one contract with core team members. There still will be some, almost all of them have some lump sum trades still at that point, and maybe some lump sum small design components. This requires a very engaged owner, which someone who can make decisions. So that may or may not be a deal breaker for an owner if they don't have capacity. That really does drive that early collaboration with not just the general contractor, but the trades partners working very much with their design partners. In this case, the team locks into a price at the end of validation, and that is the owner gets that's the price that the team is committed to in the contract. Any savings that happen throughout the project accrue to the entire team. So they don't accrue to the general contractor in this case. They accrue to the entire team. And so again, the owner in this case has multiple contractual relationships with more than one party in this case. So this can have some complexity to it in terms of managing around people so we'll just move into the next slide, Markku. And I think, so this chart is really meant, so on the top row, you'll see all the different delivery methods, design build, design bid build, CM, progressive design builds on this. And what we, on the left side is some of the more, progressive tools and processes that help us be more collaborative with our projects and with the drive to ultimately have better outcomes for owners. So you can see you may not be able to see that well on the screen, but it's, values alignment is their use of last planner system, lean practices, using multi-trade prefab, use of building information modeling and virtual design and construction, co-location. So lots of elements. And when you look, just as an example, so like the last planner system, which is second from the top there, you can use last planner system. You can choose as a general contractor you can deploy that across any one of the delivery methods. It is probably, it is actually built into the model of IPD that you would use last planner in the contract. Other things like, target value design, for example, which is where we want to design our project using the estimate as a major input, and we want to design to that estimate. You can see that is not intrinsic at all to like a lump sum project. It's not intrinsic to design build, although you absolutely could use that technique in design build, but it's not intrinsic to that model. It's a lot easier to use in a progressive design build model and an IPD model. So ultimately what comes out of this is using more collaborative project delivery methods. So progressive design build and IPD probably being the two most collaborative. You have a lot more options when it comes to doing sort of creative value generating, things like social procurement. You just have a lot more option for success and what you can deploy in your project and how you can really get strong collaboration within your team. So that leaves us on gets us through the basic delivery models that exist that are most frequently used in Canada. And now we're just going to do a quick exercise here. We're sort of interested in looking at how a model and prefab work together. So we're going to do a quick exercise, and we'd like people to do some work in the comments. So we're going to use DesignBidBuild as our as our discussion point. And we're going to first look at single trade components. So what we'd like people to do is type into the chat or the comments section. If you were going to do single trade prefab, single trade component prefab in a design build model, what would you need to be mindful of or think about if you actually wanted to, if you were going to execute that in a design build model? So just throw some of your thoughts into the chat or into the comment section.
And while we're waiting, Jen, I'll just make a comment. This is a great exercise to do with your project teams or at a staff meeting or something of that nature to really help flesh out understanding both of prefab and of delivery models. So we've used this exercise, this matrix, to fill out, if you have teams work their way through the entire exercise and fill out every intersection in the sheet, it can produce some really interesting results.
Okay, great. So we've got so far one comment. Keep it coming. So someone has said worker skills. Absolutely, yes. Someone else has commented on size of components. So yeah. Okay. What else might you need to think about for single trade components under a design build model?
Some of the things that we ran through in our guide were things like you'd want to coordinate between trades. So you'd want to make sure if the sprinkler person was doing big prefab sprinkler runs, they would need to coordinate the installation of their work with other trades that might be coming in before so that their work doesn't get in the way. So timing of placement of elements would be one consideration, for instance.
Great. And we've had some other stuff come in here. So we've had design responsibilities and contracts and appointments. Great. Narrowly written owner requirements. Yeah. Design time period, complexity, Sub-trade contracts, yes, absolutely. Type of components you're using, sequencing, capacity, integration to whole project, yes. Like really, that's great. Yeah, all good things. Okay, so now if we were going to do multi-trade components now, so not just single trade, multi-trade under a design build model, what do we need to think about now if we're going to do that? So in the same thing in the comment box, throw in, and it's some of it has already been, you guys have been talking about, but really important when you're thinking about multi-trade here if we want to be successful. Okay, so we're getting some stuff come in here. So great. So detailed design interfaces with other trades. Yes, that's great. Envelope coordination. Supply chain timing, defined scopes, quality control for multiple trades. Absolutely. Spatial coordination, sort of BIM enabled. Yes. Space constraints, scope definition, warranty. Absolutely. Great one. Team experience and team building, coordination space, standardization, scope, previous experience working together. Yeah, those are all really great. Also some like really thoughtful platform management.
Yeah, these are excellent. Fantastic. So yeah, again, we'd encourage you to do an exercise like this with your teams or your staff, regardless of your discipline or background. This can be a really useful tool to foster conversation and understanding both of the points on the prefab spectrum as well as different delivery models and their implications. Jen, do you have anything else?
No, I think that's good. Great participation. Thanks, everyone.
All right. So the last part in our guide is about how do you get started? And again, we try to emphasize over and over and over that this is not rocket science, that this is really just critical thinking. Our ability to leverage prefab value through prefab is really limited only by our creativity and imagination. However, there are some things that we can do to make it easier for our team. So we've created what we call a prefab planning tool. It's a simple Excel spreadsheet. We will be sharing this. Jen will post in the chat now a link to a Dropbox folder that'll have a PDF of our slide deck, as well as this Excel planning tool. But basically the idea is down the left-hand side are a list of commonly prefabricated items. The next set of columns, it identifies where they occupy, which point they occupy on the prefab spectrum. Then we have a column about impact on design. Is it low, medium, or high? We try to talk about the latest start for benefit. Is it in pre-design, design, pre-construction, or construction? The trades that might typically be impacted by that particular kind of item, and then a desire to explore it further and who's leading the exploration. So the idea is that a project team, whether it's internal to your company or whether it's a fully formed project team, would sit and work their way down this sheet and use it as a point of departure for conversation and to commit in that column, desire to explore further, identify these are all the things that we will choose to explore and perhaps implement on our project. So it's a relatively simple conversational framework, but has tremendous benefit in terms of helping the team understand the scope of possibilities, as well as make and follow through with commitments and aid in communication and coordination between different trades and disciplines. So, and it's infinitely expandable. So this is just a point of departure list. It's Excel, so it's editable. You can add or subtract any item that you want. So we make this available, and we'll share this with you. I think Jen has shared that link in the chat. So I think we've got just a tiny bit more, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll be able to take questions. So trying to tie everything together from our conversation today, we're suggesting that there's sort of three spectrums that exist from low to high. We've really talked about two of them. We've talked about prefab sophistication, that sort of idea of points on a spectrum from single trade to multi-trade to modular to platforming, is sort of that sophistication from low to high. We've talked about project delivery models, and really the conversation there is about collaboration, right? So that's from lump sum or design bid build to construction management to design build to IPD, sort of that spectrum from low to high on collaboration. And because this is a CAN-BIM conference, we're adding a third spectrum, which we're calling use of technology. And so BIM and VDC or things of that nature. And again, that can be a use from low to high. And what we're really trying to suggest is that you really need to pursue alignment of those three spectrums if you want greatest success. So if you're in this kind of a situation where you are looking for the highest sophistication level of prefabrication, so say platforming or volumetric modular, but you're working in a very low collaboration environment, like a design bid build environment, and you're not using building information modeling or other technologies, your chances of success are very, very low. You're probably going to have some unhappy adventures. What we're really trying to suggest is the further up the spectrum you go in prefab sophistication, the further up the spectrum you'll want to go in project delivery model, and the further up the spectrum you'll want to go with use of digital technologies. The most successful prefabrication projects occur in an environment of high technology use deployed in a highly collaborative setting, ensures the greatest success for prefab outcomes.